Hello, everyone. I hope that things are going well with your writing, and I'm happy to be here with you all today. Nancy, oh, there you are. You're at Joel's brother's place?
Concord, Mass.
Hey, hi.
Our
Hi,
nation.
Concord.
Our nation. Yeah, hi, honey.
And I know you have to leave a little bit early today, so I will close out today.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you here. And hello, everybody. So today we're going to try to cover quite a bit of content if possible. I'm going to go over a little bit of like basic IFS review as it relates to memoir and memoir writing. We're going to try to do a little bit around character development and plot and things like that. So we'll see what we actually get to. But I thought we would start writing. Shall we start with writing? Okay.
Great.
So if we can just put up the prompt. This was Nancy's prompt. I was like, Nancy, give me a prompt. What I didn't tell you then, ... So let's go ahead and take 10 minutes. We'll put on some music. If you don't like it, you can mute it. And then we'll start with a little share. And I promised you all, we will go into breakout sessions today. So we will get to that, I promise. I see we already have a hand raised. Nicholas, do you want to be our reader?
Sure. Okay. I struggled at the beginning. I couldn't think of stuff wasn't coming to me, but I finally got it. Once I got it, I got it. Okay. What I didn't tell you then is that I was grateful for you. It's been 2 years since we walked away from each other abruptly, and yet your situationship had a major lesson I needed to learn, or rather a teaching I needed to unlearn. A fear that was taught, ingrained, forced on me, dwelling within me until the time came when it'd be time to confront the belief. But the belief that showing you intimate parts of me before a certain milestone was wrong. Or rather, showing you them, period, was wrong because we were both men who just wanted to connect with another man in a similar way, a way that was wrong according to that teaching. And even after accepting myself, the fear remained. Like a thorn that wasn't removed with the stake. Even so, you told me that I needed to unlearn this. And I struggled to accept that fact because it was so ingrained, so stained within my being and heart, that even the thought of restaining it with my own beliefs was a difficult task. Yet today, here I am writing to you to tell you I made it.
Yeah. Courageous, beautiful. Oh man, you got a lot of great stuff in here, starting with the grateful for you. So we know that we can exhale. The 2 years having numbers, I'm in love with numbers. I think they're very specific. It's a detail. We need details all the time. Tell me what the line with situation was. Would you read that? It's right after 2 years.
We walked away from each other abruptly, and yet our situationship had a major lesson I needed to learn.
Situationship is fabulous. Is that a word or did you make it up?
My generation tends to use it when we can't define like a romantic relationship fully. So that's what we use it for.
Love it. It's really a winner because it says so much. The unlearn was fabulous. You had showing, teaching, and accepting. If you know my writing rules, which are not really rules, I'm in love with threes and I'm in love with INGs. The sound, writing is about sound. I will reiterate this entire workshop. Read your stuff out loud and you will hear the music. This was music. And like a thorn that was removed, couldn't do better than that. I felt it, I saw it, it was, And then ingrained and stained. I know you didn't plan to make a poem. Maybe you did, but it's the sound of it.
That was planned. That was planned.
Thank you for admitting, but good work, really. Thank you. Clapping and bowing.
Thank you.
Thank you for volunteering. It's courageous. It's scary. And now you know you can do it.
That was gorgeous. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Emily.
Can you hear me? All right.
I am.
So many things I didn't tell you then. I'm trying so very hard to tell you now. But it's been almost 25 years and I worry constantly that I might be too late. And if I am, I really can't blame you for that. You couldn't possibly deliver what I never knew to ask for, what I never knew was missing. I knew something had gone askew back when I decided to leave a few years into our relationship. I know that I stayed because I was afraid I would crumble to pieces without you. But I may never understand if I made that choice out of cowardice or self-preservation. If I had left, I would have moved back to Massachusetts on my own, probably lived in my parents' basement and taken up with the same friends I'd hung out with in high school. And while many of these friends did love me deeply, they weren't exactly the best influence or role models for the most part. They weren't the ones who'd left and returned, but the ones who never left at all. I probably would have hooked up with a guy with little to no ambition. I probably would have picked up all my worst habits, the ones you'd help me see weren't serving me in any way. I'm not really exaggerating when I say I might have ended up with a drug addiction, in jail, or in an early grave.
Powerful, powerful. Wait, in jail or an early grave. Okay. So this was stunning. And I think when you said 25 years, look how long it takes for us to process our mistakes and well, I thought the cowardice or self-preservation was brilliant because I think it's really universal. I mean, we'll never know, but actually you do know because look at your ending. I mean, your ending tells us that if you'd gone back, you would have lived in your parents' basement, you would have ended up in trouble. And you also were very kind and protective of the friends that you loved that you knew weren't good influences. So you didn't bash anyone. There's no anger in the piece. There's just wisdom all the way through. You had trying and missing. So, you know, they're your INGs. And I loved, I might be too late. So you broke up with someone, you broke his heart, you broke your heart. And when you say to deliver what I never knew to ask for and never knew was missing, that's another thing that comes with age. I mean, you can't know that when you're young. So for you to have left what you think might be prematurely, by the end of your piece, your wisdom comes through because you answer your own questions. Crumbled Pieces was phenomenal. I saw it visually, I felt it. And again, the cowardice and self-preservation line, I really think that is so human and it's so universal that we just don't know. Was I afraid or did my intuition and my gut take care of me? So I think that universality of that line is really good. And then the ones who never left at all. I just went to my 60th high school reunion, and the people that came were the ones who never left, and they were so conservative and lovely and sweet, and they've done nothing. They haven't grown, they haven't changed. They're lovely people, but nobody explored, nobody had adventures, nobody took risks. And they looked it and they look old. I mean, I look old too. We are old, but I know exactly what you meant by that. The repetition of probably would have. The thing about repetition that I like to say over and over and over again is that repetition, when it's intentional, is powerful. And you used it powerfully. When it's without thinking and it's your first draft and you haven't fixed it, it'd be like, you know, right now it's a very hot summer day. Hot summer days really bother me. It's been such a hot summer. By the time I hear hot in summer again, it has deleted the power of the original. But your probably would have is a build. And a build makes the writing powerful. And then your threes, you know, I'm in love with threes because I think there's an inherent power in the universe. I always say Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, pyramid power. 3 jokes, boom, boom, punchline. So you had drug addiction, something, and early grave. Oh, jail. And that's very possible because you would have been in that basement just doing bad stuff. So I think it's courageous. I think it's wisdom. I think these kind of stories you can write 100 times till you finally let go of it. And I thank you, Em. It was beautifully written. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
So beautiful. Okay, Marilyn.
Yikes, I didn't expect to be chosen. Okay, I'm just going to do it. What I didn't tell you when we met on that train floating through the plains of Spain 30 plus years ago, because I didn't even know it myself, was that I had oh so many wounded parts, hidden by fierce, hardworking protectors that would give you a run for your money. And yet you've loved me fiercely through these years of my many iterations, and have delighted in getting to know my little ones as they've slowly and shyly revealed themselves to me and sometimes to you. You've been ever patient as my vigilant one calls out, "Hey, you're not present. You're not listening or paying attention. Buddy, you have to earn the right to be introduced to this tender, sacred territory. I can tell when your body is present, but your heart is nowhere in sight. What you didn't know is that I'm intimately familiar with bodies taking up space while hollow and empty inside, where there's form but no substance. I'm not interested in speaking, sharing my precious words if they go unheard, echoing off the wall of your being. They deserve," and then time was up.
Oh, it's gorgeous. I couldn't write fast enough. It's so beautifully written, Marilyn. Well, on that train and plane, and 30 years again, having numbers, detail, just beautiful. I'd love that would have given you a run for your money. And what you did with the IFS, it's IFS, Internal Family Systems, IFS, protectors and my little ones, it's so vulnerable, the whole piece. And then, hey, I love the hey, that was really great. The tender, sacred territory is beautiful. It's a gorgeous phrase. And honestly, it can be anything, but I got what I think you meant. And I thought that was just beautiful. Hollow and empty, couldn't do better. Could not have, word choices, word choices in the second draft, you do better, but your first draft had them all. Form and no substance was great. And then echoing, read the line with echoing, that was beautifully written. It's after form and no substance.
Oh yeah, I'm not interested in speaking, sharing my precious words if they go unheard, echoing off the walls of your being, or the wall of your being.
Just absolutely exquisite. It's almost like a very long bumper sticker that everybody should know. I'm not interested in not being heard. It's just exquisite. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So my 11th grade English teacher was wrong when she told me I was a horrible writer.
Oh, damage, not only wrong, but evil. This is, I'm telling you, a lot of people that come to my workshop, I call it reclaiming your voice, because they all did it. They all did it. I was lucky. I had a couple of good English teachers, but there were teachers that ruined. I mean, when you talk about, a semicolon and you talk about spelling and you say you're a horrible writer, she wanted to be a writer. That's it. It was as simple as that. You were too good for her. Anyway, you're back.
Thank you.
It's gorgeous. It's actually a perfect lead in to what we're going to talk about today. Thank you to the rest of you that raised your hands that we didn't get to this round. Those were just gorgeous. What we're going to talk about is IFS and how that relates to memoir writing and how we can actually use it intentionally on purpose as part of the therapeutic process. So I'm going to ask Caitlin if she'll just put up the first IFS and memoir writing. I had some other stuff I want to get to, but I think we'll start right there since Marilyn kind of led us in perfectly. So if we can just put up that first slide. I love this image as just a kind of review of IFS. I know some of you already know internal family systems, some of you don't, but basically it's based on the idea that all of us, every single one of us is made up of multiple parts, that we're not just a unilateral self or a unified self. We are also not, it's not the same thing as somebody who has a dissociative disorder, for example, or what we used to call multiple personality disorder, but we're not that different from people who have multiple personality disorder. The difference is only that some of us have more access to self or more integration of our parts than others. And internal family systems can be helpful and useful for anybody along that spectrum with regard to their parts. And so we all know this. I know you've heard me say this before, but we all know this because each one of us has met multiple parts anytime we make a New Year's resolution, right? You have the part that wants you to improve, and it's like a self-help part, and it wants you to whatever, go to the gym or break your addiction or whatever it is that your inner critic judges as bad. So you have the inner critic or the self-improvement part that makes the promise. And then you have the part that does the thing that the inner critic doesn't like, or that the self-improvement part doesn't like. So you resolve to stop it. And then if you're like most of us, then you have the part that goes and breaks the New Year's resolution. And then you have parts that come in and shame you and criticize you and say you're lazy or whatever. So we all have a tendency to do that. And in IFS, we call it polarized parts. And this, I love just the whole idea of polarized parts, because it gives language and permission to what we all have. Like anytime we're making a pros and a cons list, for example, then we're dealing with polarized parts. We have parts that want us to do something and parts that don't want us to do something. And often they are managers fighting with firefighters. So if you look at this image, you'll see that in IFS, there are 3 different categories of parts. There are managers on the left, there are firefighters on the right, and there are exiles on the bottom. Managers are proactive. These are parts that are trying to anticipate bad things that could happen, anticipate danger, and fend it off. They are to-do list makers, time managers. They look at your bank account and tell you you need to save money or make more money or spend less money. They're thinking about the future a lot of the time, and they're basically responding to past painful things that have happened or past dangers that you've experienced, or often they're generational. They didn't even happen to you, it happened to your mother or your grandmother, and so you kind of inherit some of these managers. And they are usually pro-social. They try to make you acceptable, and their main job is to make sure that you don't feel any of the pain of the exiles, which we'll get to in a minute. So they're like the first line of duty. These are like people-pleasing, perfectionistic parts, anxious parts, procrastinating parts, overachieving parts, caregiving parts. These are all managers. And they're the first line. If, let's say, the flames of the emotion of the exiles, if the managers can't keep those under control, there's the next line of defense, which in IFS we call the firefighters, because they're trying to put out those flames. They do not want you to feel the pain of the exiles. So these are usually the parts that our managers don't like. So our firefighters may be, raging parts, addict parts, disordered eating parts, parts that get us in trouble. Basically anything in the DSM-5, which is the psychiatrist's book of diagnoses. So bipolar disorder parts or suicidal parts, psychotic parts, manic parts, basic, all of the psychiatric parts. And in my line of work, often physical health issues can be related to firefighters. So these can be parts that give you migraines, parts that cause your asthma to act up, parts that might be related to nervous system dysregulation and cause long-term chronic health issues. So the firefighters, we tend to like our managers. We may not like the inner critic, but we tend to like the parts that keep us organized, keep us in line, keep us from getting in too much trouble. And we tend to not like our firefighters. It's difficult to realize that these parts also are trying to protect us. So the managers and firefighters are both what we call protector parts, and they're trying to protect us from feeling the pain of our exiles. And the exiles are like our imprisoned inner children. They tend to carry burdens, and they're all beautiful parts. Our exiles are also like magical children. They're like beautiful, playful, sweet little kids, but because they carry these burdens, they feel worthless, helpless, hopeless, ashamed, lonely, despairing, rejected, all kinds of things that we might feel because of adverse childhood experiences or developmental traumas. They may also be institutional or collective traumas, things like racism or having been terrified of climate crisis or, Holocaust generational wounds and things like that. So what's beautiful about this system is that we can actually use our memoir writing skills to get to know our parts. We can allow any of these parts that we are curious to get to know, we can just let them start writing. We can let that be the prompt. In IFS, we call it a trailhead. So you may, anytime you notice that you feel even just the slightest bit triggered, you can just ask, who's here now? And sit down and let that part write. I'm an artist, and I know a lot of artists who also will maybe make a piece of art related to that part. I met this one incredible woman who was an illustrator, and she had these gorgeous illustrations of every single part she'd ever met. It was just an incredible way to honor those parts. But we can do the same thing with writing. We can actually let them tell their stories. And what I really appreciate about this, at least the way I use it, is there's a whole system called Unburdening the Exiles, which is sort of, if there's a goal in IFS, it's to get to know the protectors and get them to relax enough that they will let us go to the exiles, excuse me, and help unburden those exiles. And the first part of unburdening the exiles is what's called the witnessing. And this is where we go into the scene where these inner children are usually trapped in the past. And we come in there with that core self that you see in the center of this image. And the core self is has these 8 C's of self. We can go to the next slide about the 8 C's of self. These qualities of self, of courage, of confidence, of curiosity, of calmness, clarity, compassion, connectedness, and creativity. And with that, even if there's just curiosity is usually the first C of self to show up. We may not always feel compassionate with some of our firefighters, for example, or we may not feel compassionate for our inner critic, but we can usually manage to feel curious. And if we're curious and we can get to know our protectors, and we'll talk about that in a minute, then we can often develop trust between our protectors and ourselves, and those protectors will start to relax enough to let us go into the scenes of the exiles. And we talked in the first class about the importance of not overriding protector permission, meaning not just going straight to the core wounds of the inner children without getting to know the protectors first. So that's why I think this process can be really helpful to help us get to know those protectors. And once we do, once the protectors let us go to those really tender, really hurt parts, and we can bring at least curiosity, if not all these 8 C's of self, then we can begin the witnessing. And the witnessing, in my IFS therapy sessions, sometimes I feel like the therapist wants the witnessing to go quicker than it actually does in my system. And so the way that I work with this is that if I meet an exile and the protectors have kind of backed off enough to let me go to the exile and spend some time with the exile, I like to kind of take my time with this process and let the exile write. So it's like I am witnessing as self the part that is telling the story. And then I have a record of it. It's like I'm literally getting it out of my body. I'm literally putting it here. I'm making something beautiful and artistic and creative with it. And self is watching, and other parts can be watching. And so that's just the first part of the unburdening. The second part is basically where we go into the scene and we ask the part, what should have happened? And we do sort of the redo. What should have happened? And if we could rewrite the story in the most idealized way, And in the redo, you know, it's just happening in your inner world. So you can write it as fictionalized as you want. You could, it's okay if parts want you to go in and like kill mom. Like you can go in and be as violent as you need to be. You can go in and call the police. You can go in and do whatever. Nothing bad happens in the outer world if you rewrite the story in your inner world. And again, I think we can use writing that way. So we can go in, we can write the story the way it actually happened, the real vulnerable, messy, true story. But then we can also go to the part and say, what should have happened? And let the part dictate that. Let the part tell you how they wish it had happened. And in the unburdening process, self goes in and basically makes it happen. So it's like, all right, you want me, the 54-year-old version of Lissa, to go into the scene and teach my mother at 24, here's some parenting classes, here's what you shouldn't have done, or here's what I'm going to do instead and replace the mother. So it can be a beautiful process to allow that to happen. If we can go to the next slide, I think one of the things that can be very helpful as a self-help practice, the unburdening process, there's only so much, there are limits to what we can do on our own without therapeutic support from, you know, people that are experienced in holding space and co-regulating and helping us stay in self so that we can safely go to the exiles and unburden them. But one of the things that I think can be done quite well for a lot of people on our own is working with the protectors. So these are the managers and the firefighters. And what we can do is, let's say we know that we have a part that criticizes our creativity. That would usually be a manager. So we could say, okay, find that part in, on, or around the body. Where do I feel that inner critic? Where do you feel that inner critic, or the part that, doesn't like your writing, doesn't want you to write, and feel where it is in the body. And then you can put your attention on it. I like to close my eyes. Not everybody likes to close their eyes, but you can focus on that part with or without your eyes closed and flesh it out. Does that part look, do you get an image of that part? Can you see something? Do you smell anything? Do you taste anything? Do you hear anything? Is there a voice? Does that part have anything it wants to say? And then the fourth part is, how do you feel towards that part? And this is looking to see if there's enough self there. So if you hate that part, if you're scared of that part, that's actually another protector. Because if there's any self, then you'll at least be curious about that part. You'll have some of those 8 C's of self. And if you're not, then you would work with that other protector, the part that judges it, the part that doesn't like it. Excuse me. And then you would sort of do the 6 F's with that other part as well, and you can sort of separate them out. But assuming you feel at least curious, then you know it's safe enough to go forward. And you can befriend that part by finding out a little bit more about it. We'll tell you in the next slide how to do that. And then the last one is finding out, what does this part fear? What is it afraid would happen? So this part maybe that criticizes your writing. What is it afraid would happen if it didn't criticize your writing? And often that will point us to the exile. So for example, if we have a really hypercritical part, it's usually trying to prevent you from being humiliated. Maybe somebody humiliated you because you shared something creative that you did when you were young and you were shamed, humiliated. So, you know, that will often take us to the part that was humiliated. So let's go to the next slide, which is befriending the protectors. These are just questions that you can ask, and you can actually just use these questions to get to know the protectors by letting them write the answers. But just to show you how the process works, you can ask this inner critic, how did it get this job? How good a job is it doing? Is it effective? Is it working? If it didn't have to do this job, what would it do instead? Usually the protectors are exhausted. They don't want to be doing this. They are burdened. The protectors themselves are burdened from having had to do this so long, so hard. And then you can ask, how old is this part? And how old does it think that you are? And what else does it want you to know? And what does it want for you? Usually it's, it really has a positive intention for you. Even parts that might on the surface look like they're causing you harm or they're causing other people harm. Deep down, they really are trying to protect you. They really are sincerely trying to make things better in your life. So I thought we'd just take a moment and practice this. So close your eyes if you feel okay to do that. And let's just see if there's a part that comes up. Let's work with one of the protectors, not the exile for right now. And just see if there's a part maybe that's been, maybe you feel like it's interfering with you writing your memoir, getting in the way in some way, sabotaging, not letting you write, criticizing you, whatever. And just take a moment to notice if there's a part that wants your attention. And if you find it, just see where it lives in or around or on your body. And put your attention there. Just focusing on that part of your body. And noticing sometimes when we put our attention on a certain part of our body or a certain part that's in the body, it starts to shift just when we notice it. But notice what happens when you focus on it. And see if you can flesh it out at all. Is there an image? Do you see a scene? Is there a sensation in your body? Do you have any intuition about it? Maybe there are sensations like sound, smell, touch, memories. And just see how you feel towards that part. And if there are other parts, maybe you have other parts that don't like it because it's interfering with another part's goal for you to write. So notice if you judge it, if you don't like it, if you are scared of it. And if so, see if those parts will just give a little bit of space and step aside. Those would be other protectors that you could get to know later. But just see if they'll take their turn. And if they won't, then you can focus on that instead. But if they'll maybe just go wait in a waiting room and come back and notice again, how do you feel towards this part now? And if you have at least a little bit of curiosity, or maybe you even feel sorry for this part, maybe you feel some compassion, then see if you can just get to know it a little bit better. If your other protectors will let you, just kind of ask it, how did this part that's interfering with your writing, how did it get its job? And maybe how old were you when it got its job? How does it feel about the job that it's doing? Does it like this job? Or maybe if it didn't have to leave, our parts are sometimes really afraid that we're going to banish them, and we never banish our parts, but we might ask, what would you rather do instead? If you weren't going to get in the way of writing, what else would you do? What else could you do? How does this part think that it's protecting you? And how old does this part think you are? And if it thinks you're younger than you are, just let it know how old you actually are. And while you're paying some attention to this part, just see, is there anything that it wants you to know about how it got its job, why it's here, how it's trying to keep you safe? because we can be sure it's in some way trying to keep you safe. And if it feels ready, you can ask it, what is it afraid of? What is its biggest fear of what would happen if this part didn't come in and prevent you from writing? And see if you can just listen. And then Caitlin, if we could skip ahead to the creative prompt, the parts writing the letter, creative prompt, without processing it any further, why don't you open your eyes and let this part that you're just getting to know a little bit start to write to you, and let the part, at least this part that doesn't want you to write you a letter right now. So just take this part and let it write to you, to the adult, grown-up you. And just let it free form write. We'll just give you, let's just do 5 minutes for this one. Just 5 minutes to let this part communicate with you. We'll put on some music. All right. I know there's some questions about IFS, but let's just hear from a couple people. So if you want to raise your hand, we'll take a couple of reads. Before you read, I just want to say, please don't raise your hand if you've already read, and please make sure it's okay with your parts. This is really important. Sometimes we go too fast, we get excited, and we want to share something about our parts, but we really should always be double checking to make sure we have consent from our parts when we're sharing some of these things. So if you have raised your hand, Florina, if you want to go, as long as it's all right with your parts to share, we'll go ahead and hear from Florina.
Hi, thank you. So it's okay to share, although it's kind of hard for me to do so. So what I wrote is, from my part, I'm trying to tell you, girls like you don't do these kind of things. I'm telling you this so you won't be disappointed later. You were never into writing before. Where did this come from? Do you think writing a few poems when you were a teenager qualifies you to be a writer? I suggest you go back and stay in your shell. You don't want to risk being seen and noticed. You will be too arrogant and then no one will like you. I want to protect you from the disappointment and the failure that's coming. There's so many other people who are talented and are better than you anyway. Not a no-name nobody like you.
Wow. Oh, it's so honest and so healthy and so courageous to have written this. I'm not going to talk about the writing. I'm just going to talk about your huge heart and your wise soul. This is just such an important exercise, because look what you did. Girls like you don't do these things. Wow. Just the messages that all of us got. It's amazing. We can function. And we we're walking around looking perfectly normal, and look at these broken parts that just got so damaged and hurt by damaged people. Sometimes I say, we're storytellers, but lately I've been saying we're tellers. We're telling on them, because look what they did. I mean, so many other people more talented than you. We all heard that. Teachers did it. Uncles did it. Parents did it. It's just, you wrote a couple of poems. You're just going to be arrogant if you think you're good. Just stunning. And I think it's pretty universal too. I just think what you wrote was a lot of people's stories, and very courageous.
Thank you for allowing me to share.
How do you feel? How do you feel about that part having heard from you?
So I'm not new to IFS. I've been working with parts, so I'm not surprised. I am. It's very hard for me to share.
Yeah, no wonder. I mean, it makes a lot of sense given how much that part is working to keep you safe.
Right, and this is why I was hoping the part agreed with me to share because I wanted it to hear, I wanted me to hear me say the words.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to respond with this part, which is everyone will like you. Everyone will love you for the courage and for the universality of your saying what you're saying, because so many people have the same message. So my
Thank you.
part is bowing to yours.
Yeah, and I would be curious how many people who are listening to that part are like, oh my gosh, how did she know my part is saying the same thing? So
And I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, no.
I don't think I realized so many people identify with that.
Oh my God, yes.
So
I think
thank you for all the messages.
Yeah, especially anybody in any marginalized group, whether female, non-white, LGBTQIA plus, any sort of disability, any kind of neurodiversity. I think the more marginalizations we have, the louder those voices sometimes tend to be. Yeah.
But I think the universal message that everyone has is, I thought I was the only one.
Yeah.
And it's so comforting. It's so generous when you are willing to share it, because then all of the other people who think they're the only one go, oh yeah, me too.
Yeah, that's what they're saying in the chat. Oh yes.
Yes,
100%.
that's what I noticed. And it's so liberating. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for thank you to that part for letting you let us hear it. It's beautiful. I
Thank
really
you.
like this part of you. It's obviously working so hard. So as much as we can all just send compassion to those parts that are working so hard to try to make sure you don't get hurt, really makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, Maureen, if your part's willing to share.
Yeah, thanks. I think we got some similar themes here. All right, I'm also at work, so it'll be a little quiet. Right, it's Mom. You've been whinging all afternoon about the writing you have to do for language arts at school and how you think you're so antisocial, having no friends, which isn't even the meaning of the word antisocial. But we're not doing your evening reading of the encyclopedia in front of the Simpsons here. I'm also speaking without the knowledge that, as I talk to you, my 10-year-old daughter, that you're going to date an older dictionary editor when you're age 35, but I digress. But I can tell you, even now, when you're 10, that I need you to know what these writer people are like. When I was working for the federal government in 1979 as a press officer, my boss thought I was the greatest employee in the world and was inviting me to happy hour with the people going to Columbia Journalism School and the people working for the Post and for Newsweek. And they were just the most obnoxious, the most privileged people, just like not people you want to spend time with. And I quit that work to raise you because I couldn't deal with those people anymore. And I don't doubt that you're a brilliant woman. I know that you've won all these awards in school and I'm so proud of you, but you're so kind. You have such a big heart. You are such a decent person and you have so much else going on in your life. Why do you need that second career? Why in God's name would you want to ever be associated with any of these people? You don't need to be with them, Maureen, or be around these people. Most people are just content doing one thing, and we love you no matter what. We will love you even if you never write a book. I even loved you when I edited your terrible paper in 5th grade on Caesar Augustus and did the line edit that Dad said reminded me of when I was working for a living. And I don't think I'm any great talent at editing, Reen, to be totally honest, but it just reminds me of what your Nana and your grandfather used to say to me. That we come from an Irish family, it's about secrets, and ultimately nobody really cares about you. Nobody is listening to what you have to say and wants to hear it. So you don't have to be anxious at all. You can think whatever you want, but you don't have to say it. No one cares.
Fucking brilliant. I already told you this about you because I heard you. I was privileged to hear your voice last time. And you have a voice that is so intact. And this is such a monologue that I want you to memorize it. And I want you to get up and either put it on a podcast or get on stage. The details, I mean, those writer people, what they're like, and your whole the paper the Caesar Augustus, every detail is stunning and your voice is phenomenal. I just love hearing your voice. You're such a great writer. The whole, we're Irish Catholic, we know about the secrets and the antisocial thing and such, not people you want. And I'm so proud, even when I when I helped you with that paper, I'm telling you, you have a story. She gave you your story. You have to thank her now. Because honest to God, this is beyond the beyond. You gotta perform this. Agreed? Everybody agree? Unbelievable.
Absolutely. Wow. I can't even believe that you wrote all of that in 5 minutes. Like this part has a lot to say very
Yeah.
quickly.
I was going to thank you for that. First of all, it's very generous, but my mother is the best writer I know and just refuses to engage her life as material. It disappoints me every day. But she beyond that, like it's a protective part. It's a loving part.
Well, you're the best writer in her life, and the Simpsons line. Oh my God, everything was so great. She didn't get to do her dream, and I have a feeling that she didn't really want you to do yours either. So go ahead and do it because you got it.
Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. Thank you. That I had never heard it put that way before. The writer in her life. That will stick with me. Thank you. And I enjoyed listening to everybody else too.
Still, you gotta start listening to the brilliance of you.
One thing that I found really curious is it's almost like a bunch of parts came in. And there was just like they were fighting for who's going to be front. Like this one's jumping in and then this one's jumping in and they're contradicting each other. And they're all you, which is what's gorgeous. And I think that's why people are saying this needs to be on stage. It's like we all are listening to that inside of our own heads all the time. If any of you saw Inside Out, the kids movie, the Pixar movie, with the little girl that has all the little parts and they're fighting for control. We all do that. And it's amazing when we can actually start to put it out there and listen to what it sounds like. If any of you have ever gone to like a meditation retreat and you close your eyes and you suddenly realize like, wow, they're all in there. There's like 25 of them and they're all chattering away, right? The Buddhists call it like the monkey mind, but it's not just one monkey. There's like 30 monkeys that might be there at any given time, and they are fighting for relevance, fighting for who's first, who's blended, is what we call it in the IFS world, where they kind of hijack us. And it's just so cool to be able to hear them sort of putting their words on paper. That was absolutely gorgeous. Let's do one more. Megan, let's go with Megan. And then I want to share a little bit more stuff.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Dear little girl, I see you so scared, feeling unloved, uncared for, unseen. Actually, you may have been more loved and cared for than you felt. You felt abandoned, afraid, alone, scared. But you're not that same little girl. Now you're grown up and stronger, and you know so much more. You don't have to lie in your bed, disassociate, trying to escape from feeling your feelings. You can feel them safely. No one will judge you. It's worse to suppress the feeling, to try to be impassive, because that's what felt safer for you when you were a little girl. You think back to the time of hearing the truck driving up the road, lying in bed with a sore throat, for the umpteenth time, for Dr. Jammy to come in with his black doctor's bag to comfort you. You couldn't say what bothered you. It got stuck in your throat. And now you don't get sore throats. You grew up. Little girl, you finally grew up, and now you can tell your stories.
Yes, you can. And you did. Wow. Just gorgeous. Just gorgeous. I love the reading of it. And you have the wisdom. It's like you don't really even, can you not hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, good. I mean, you've already got the message. It's clear that you've already healed that little girl, but hearing it and getting it on the page, and you can reread this when you're having a moment of insecurity, but I think you know. You know, that stuck in your throat thing was brilliant. That was just amazing, but you're a
Thank
grown up.
you.
Now you can tell your story. So you're going to write a memoir? Are you going to do it?
I've done so many different attempts and renditions at it, actually.
Well, but you want to get it out there, right?
We'll see. You know, it's sort of a work in progress. I mean, I'm doing it in little bits and pieces, and I'm in an informal writers group. The funny thing is that they don't seem to really like it so much. So
Get out of there. Oh my God. I mean, not that everybody should say you're amazing, but if you're not getting good feedback, they could either be threatened, jealous, not informed, not really good at listening. I personally think being in a safe place when you're tender and you're writing these words that are your babies and your truth. And if you're not in a safe place, they will stop you and it'll get stuck in your throat again. So really think about this group and get yourself into a safe group. You know, in my writing workshop, I have one rule, and that is when you finish, we tell you what we loved, which is great for the embryonic stage. It's great for maybe 1, 2, 3 passes, but then, you know, drafts, but then you do need it. You do need an editor. You do need somebody to say, okay, this needs work, cut this is, but you sound like you're with editors too soon. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm still really in the beginning stage of just trying to formulate the story at this point. I think that they're more advanced than I am, basically.
So you could also ask them for what you want, and you could say, just tell me what you loved right now. That's what I'm really looking for.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that.
I
Appreciate
love
it.
that you modeled also a different way of working with parts with your writing, which is that you can sort of embody more of your adult, loving mother self to mother those young parts. And so it can be beautiful to do it both ways. So some of you were writing from the parts, right? And then you're writing more to the parts, and you can actually create a dialogue back and forth between the parts that got hurt, or the protectors that are protecting the parts that got hurt, and the wise, mature, adult, divine, you know, uncorruptible umbilical spot of grace inside of each of us, to quote Mark Nepo. So I love that there was a little bit of both of that in this piece, and I absolutely agree. Find a group that can be more supportive. And I love the idea of just setting boundaries, like asking for what you need, just saying, right now, I'm at a place where I need more validation and support and less editing criticism. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
just wanna
Thanks,
say one
lady.
more thing. I just want to say one more thing. You're saying they're more advanced. I'm not sure that's right. Because if they were so advanced, I don't think they'd be criticizing you. I think they'd be nurturing you.
It's not so much criticizing. I think that they probably, their styles are completely different. And I think that, you know, I probably need to be more with people who understand memoir, is what I'm realizing from doing this work.
Okay, good. Now you know.
They're just more like more sophisticated, you know, $25 words. I'm
think
like a $5 word person.
I think you're giving them way more credit. And if I think I punched them all in the nose. You're
Thanks.
being very generous, but I have a feeling if you're not getting nurtured and people aren't finding the good phrases that you're writing and not cheerleading for you and saying, this is great, keep going with this. I don't call them advanced. Different style. And we all have a different style. That's what this is about. Everybody doesn't have the same voice or the same story. We have the universal themes, but yeah, I would be very, very careful with these humans. I don't want them to have this stuck in your throat anymore.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Megan.
you. Thank you.
Caitlin, if we could go back to the first slide that I put in there about the first sets of slides. I found this list I thought was really, really fun for questions to help you write about someone in your memoir. And it reminded me of, Anne Lamott, there's a great little practice in her book, Bird by Bird, which I love, where she says, give the characters in your novel or your memoir, give them an acre of land and see what they do with it. And I love that. I love that question. And these questions are more like that. So I just threw these in here so that if you're thinking about characters in your memoir, including you, but especially, you know you pretty well, but the other characters in your memoir, maybe you don't know some of these things about them. So the blank is like fill in the blank of the character in your story. You know, if it's Mary, what would Mary's face tell if you knew nothing else? How could you describe Mary's face, in other words? What would Mary's body tell if you knew nothing else? What would Mary's posture and gait tell if you knew nothing else? What would her manner and style tell? These are all different ways you can describe Mary. And let's say Mary's name is the name of a color. What color is Mary's name? Mary is an animal. What animal is Mary? Mary is a food. What food is Mary? Who would play Mary in a movie about her? If Mary's brains are not in the heart, the heart is not in the chest, and the guts are not in the belly, where are they? If Mary is two people, and this is where IFS, this question made me think of IFS. If Mary is two people, describe them and how they work together and don't work together. And of course, Mary is probably more than two people. Mary might have 30 parts that are sometimes cooperating and allying with each other and sometimes polarizing and fighting each other. If Mary is really a spy, who is she a spy for and what is her assignment? If you were going to spend a year in close contact with Mary, where would you prefer for it to be and under what circumstances? What would be the worst place and circumstance? And imagine that you believe all character and behavior comes from imitating significant role models when young. Who and what sorts of people do you suppose Mary imitated? Now, imagine that you believe that souls are reincarnated over and over again as they work their way gradually from being a vegetable to being a pure spirit. Where is Mary in this cycle, and where might she have been previously, and what might she be reincarnated as in the next life? Now, imagine you're an extreme Freudian who believes that all important behavior grows out of unconscious feelings, usually sexually or aggressive. Give a quick interpretation of Mary's behavior and functioning. So Freudianly psychoanalyze Mary. And if you were writing the history of sounds that you've heard while being with Mary, excluding words, what would be the 3 or 4 most important sounds? Imagine that you think Mary is a very good person. Now describe Mary as a good person. Imagine that you think Mary is a very bad person. Now describe Mary as a bad person. What is something that would never happen to Mary? Like, oh, Mary would never go to jail. Now imagine Mary going to jail. What would be the outcome if Mary actually went to jail? Imagine an important situation where you were with Mary. Now close your eyes and try to bring the experience back. Now pretend to be Mary and describe the situation. And then what weather does Mary bring into the room? You can imagine if you were to go through this process and really get to know each of these characters and go through some of these questions, give them an acre and see what they would do with it. You might learn a lot about Mary in a way that would help you write about Mary more creatively. Maybe you could include some of these metaphors, or some of what you might write in answer to these questions might actually be able to come in to the descriptions of Mary or into the dialogue about Mary. Do you want to say anything about that, Nancy?
Oh, I love the exercises are fabulous. You can have such a good time. Of course, when you said the vegetable thing, I immediately said, okay, zucchini. And the reason I thought zucchini is because I just wrote a thing about, we had a very sexy neighbor who was a gardener, and I had never grown anything in a garden. And she was Earth Mother, and she had cleavage, and she used to come over with her zucchini, and she'd hand it to my husband, who he'd say, as he looked into her cleavage, I love zucchini. And I'd be like, You've never had a fucking zucchini in your life. And then I was so depressed, I put the zucchini in the linen closet. So I thought of zucchini when I thought of the vegetable that you baked. It sent me on a trip. And I thought I'd share the trip with you.
Excellent, fantastic. All right, so if we can put up the slide about grounding your story in the aliveness of place, that was another thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is, being able to set the scene for your memoir, to be able to really help locate where you are. And you might remember, you might be able to just go by memory, or you might have been really young when you were in some of the places that these things happen. Maybe you don't even know. So you might want to, part of it might just be observation you remember from your memory. Part of it might be research. Maybe you need to actually go back and visit the place and allow one of the other, number 8 on this slide show the change and transformation of the place over time. Maybe you remember a place, and what if your memoir comes into present time, and what if the place has changed? How can you help the reader feel the change of the place over time? It really helps to engage the senses, to be able to give yourself a multi-sensory experience of being in the place where these things happen, but then help the reader feel what you feel and smell what you smell and hear what you hear and see what you see and taste what you taste and intuit what you intuit. You can use all of your 6 senses as well. You can use, it really helps to use descriptive language, but you also want to avoid over describing. I've definitely read some of those books where you're like, wow, you've just told me 10 pages about the place and there's actually nothing happening. So finding that balance between describing so that we can actually locate it, but also giving us character development, giving us dialogue, giving us plot. So showing through character interaction, establishing a sense of place. In other words, what's happening in the scene? You don't want to just describe the scene unless you're describing the scene almost like a part of the character. And I've seen that done actually quite beautifully in memoir, where some memoir writers will almost make the place alive. Like you can imagine if you're writing about New Orleans and it's this sticky, sweaty, smelly, alive, moving place that has so much, that has a character of its own. Making sure that you establish a time and an era, like when, it's not just where, but when is this where? What time chronologically is this New Orleans in the 1950s? Is it New Orleans now? Is it New Orleans over a space of 3 years or 30 years or 90 years? Another way to sort of bring the place alive is to use place specific dialogue and dialect. When I was an English major at Duke, I majored in African American women's literature. One of my favorite books is Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. And it was set in a town that was about 20 minutes from where I grew up. And most of it is written in sort of Black Southern dialect. And it's just absolutely gorgeous. And if you've ever been to Eatonville where it's set, like you really get a sense of Eatonville, which was an all Black town, one of the early Black towns governed by Black politicians, very Black. And so you get a real sense of the place and of the characters in large part because of the language. When this was back in the 1920s, when almost nobody was considering writing in dialect to be literature. It was seen as less than. And I absolutely love memoirs that include that sort of place specific or race specific or culture specific dialogue and dialect. Incorporating cultural or historical context. So, being able to, especially if you're writing about a place that maybe a lot of people don't know about, being able to do a little bit of historical education or cultural education to help the reader sort of make sense of the context that your story is happening in. And then we talked about number 8, and then, reading and learning from other writers. So find those memoirs that you really feel the drippy, sweaty space that someone's writing about, and just, yeah, copy them, copy them. These are, as Nancy put in the notes, these are your mentors. And we are all sort of knocking each other off, hopefully ethically, knocking each other off ethically by being inspired by each other and trying to, you know, copy our mentors in the best possible way. The first art class I ever took, we just went to the museums and we tried to copy the masters in the museums. And it's okay to do that when you're practicing as well. So any comments on that, Nance?
Oh, no, I just love everything. I mean, I'm big on learning from other writers. I think reading, possibly reading, constantly reading your favorites, underline stuff, memorize stuff, definitely. And the dialogue, I'm very big on, let me hear what the people say. Let me hear how they sound. I get to know them if I hear them talk. Don't tell me what you think they said or quote them. Let me hear them talk.
All right, great. There's a couple of questions, but I don't really understand most of these questions. Like Abby said, could you give a concrete example? But I don't know of what. Sandra said, what do you mean creates illusion safety with inner critic? I'm assuming that Sandra is asking about how an inner critic could be a protector, but I'm not entirely sure. If that's the question, how could an inner critic be a protector? Again, critics are some of our inner critics and outer critics. Many of us have both an inner critic and an outer critic, a part that's criticizing ourselves and a part that's going out and criticizing other people. We tend to have one part stronger than the other. So for example, in my system, I have a part that I call the integrity police, and it is absolutely policing my integrity, and it's on me all the time for like, am I in integrity here? But it also goes out and it's judging. It's like scanning and judging everybody out there that's abusing their power, that's sleeping with their students, that's, you know, violating marginalized groups, that's tone policing and not woke enough or whatever. So a lot of us have those parts that are both aimed inward and sometimes aimed outward, and they're all trying to protect us. The question is how? So that's why we do the 6 F's. That's why we ask those questions to befriend those protectors, because it looks like, oh, this part is just harming us, right? Like, how could a part that gives us a migraine be helping us? And that's the work, is finding out how are these parts helping us. And again, usually inner critic parts are trying to make us perfect, because at some point when we've been human and flawed, we've been abused, criticized, humiliated, shamed, stood up in the middle of class and judged. We've been had physical violence aimed at us. Usually there's all kinds of things that have happened when we didn't get it right, where love was unconditional, where maybe all the best we could hope for was a very conditional approval or praise, where unconditional love might not have been on the menu. And so those parts, they really do think they're helping us because they're trying to perfect us. And they often, when it comes to creative parts, they don't want us to put anything out there that might get us any external criticism. And it's legit, like these parts are legit. Like, as somebody who puts my creative work out in the public eye, both my visual arts and my written work, you get pummeled when you put your work out there in public. So it's legit. Those parts actually, if you have parts that can't handle criticism, then yeah, these parts know that, and they are trying to protect you from getting so criticized that maybe you're completely silenced. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't put our work out there, but it means that in order to put our work out there and not get completely collapse under the criticism, it's helpful to be able to work with these protectors before we put things out there. All right, we are running out of time, and I promised that we would get into breakout groups this time. So let's see, Nancy, should we do one more writing prompt, or should we?
Well, I have to leave a quarter of.
Okay. Do you think we should do one more writing prompt, or should we let them share one of the things that they've already written?
Yeah, let's do that. I'm sorry about breakout groups. We'll do it next time. I have to make a ferry.
No,
Okay.
we're gonna do breakout groups without you. We're gonna let you go. We're gonna do breakout groups without you, because I promised them that we would do breakout groups this
There's
time.
her integrity police right there.
Exactly. I'm gonna keep my promise.
Made a promise.
Okay, so we'll say goodbye to Nancy, because Nancy has to go catch a ferry. And just remember, we're gonna go into breakout groups for those of you who wish to go into breakout groups. And do you want to remind them, most important thing about breakout groups?
Tell your reader what you loved. It's not a rule that you have to say anything. If you're not moved, don't make it up. This isn't about becoming best friends. This is about, oh my God, I loved what you wrote. I'm saying goodbye. Namaste, everybody. See you Wednesday.
Goodbye. I'll give a little bit more instruction. Bye, Nancy. All right. So for those of you who wish to, what we're going to do is you had 2 writing prompts. Pick one of them that you wish to share. If you're going to go into the breakout groups, we'll ask that one of you be timekeeper, and we're going to give you a full 30 minutes in your breakout groups this time. So if one of you can just look at how many people there are and make sure everybody gets equal time, so one person doesn't hijack the whole session, and try to do like Nancy does if you can, and just make notes, write things down. It requires a lot of paying attention. So notice if there are parts of you that are distracting you and you're thinking about something else and you're not paying attention, and see if you can get those parts to relax so you can really pay attention, and try to make very specific notes so that you can tell people what you love. And I would say if someone is sharing the second prompt about their parts, in particular, if they're sharing about their parts, not only say what you love about what they wrote, but if you can, just validate that part. It can be helpful to mirror the parts, to say, oh, I hear that this part, whatever. Those parts, when we're sharing, they can be very vulnerable. So if you can just extend empathy, compassion, those 8 C's of self, and really just say things like, that makes sense, and let those parts know, even if they're harsh or you have some judgment. If you have parts that have some judgment, get those parts to step aside and just validate the parts. So you do not have to go into a breakout group if you would like to stay in the main room and just work on some of your writing, or you can start working on the homework prompt, which is the bottom line is ... You're welcome to start. The bottom line is ... We'll go ahead and put you in breakout groups, and I'll let Caitlin give you instructions. Okay, welcome back. How was that? Just post in the chat if you can for just a minute. How did it go? And I noticed, I was just looking in the Q&A, I tried to answer some of your questions. And Sylvia had a question about copyright, but I see that she had to leave early. So I will bring it up to talk about in the next class. But I just posted a link to a Cornell legal document about copyright issues for writers. So I made a note to myself to bring it up next time. But okay, great. You all are saying beautiful things. Fabulous writing, wonderful, scary, but healing, powerful, validating, real. It was life-giving. Such a wonderful opportunity to listen and share with a very small group. Great group, large and small group today. Lovely. Always so helpful to connect in a smaller group and hear stories and receive feedback. Okay, great. I'm so glad to hear that. And our homework prompt for those that didn't sort of stay in the group, the main group, to work on it during breakout session time. We can go ahead and put up that homework prompt again, Caitlin. And if you wish, please feel free to share anything that you wrote today or anything that you write in response to the homework prompts in the Facebook group. I love being able to read what you all are writing. And the homework prompt is, the bottom line is ... I don't see the slide yet, but the bottom line is ... All right, and okay, great. I'm seeing more wonderful things. Nobody's saying that was terrible. I really hated everybody in my group, maybe. Anyway, I love hearing from all of you, and thank you for cooperating with the gushing boundaries. Oh, there's our slide. Okay. Homework prompt. The bottom line is ... And next time we will talk a little bit more about plot and character and dialogue and things like that. So I look forward to seeing you there. And in the meantime, your other homework is just practice listening to your parts, practice letting them write to you, practice writing back to them from self or from another part, if you wish, and see what arises. It can be an incredibly rich source of therapeutic writing, healing, and also just beauty. There's such beautiful parts. So let's go ahead and just unmute everybody so we can say goodbye and see you next time.